The storm didn't creep into town. It slammed against it like an angry giant. Rain hammered the rooftops. Lightning split the sky, and the old houses of Willow Creek groaned as if they might snap in half. Inside one of those homes, Mark Turner pulled the curtains tight, every boom of thunder rattling the glass behind him. He wasn't just a man fighting through the night, he was a father, alone, doing everything he could to keep his little girl safe. Sophie, his 7-year-old daughter, clutched her stuffed bear so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her wide eyes flicked toward the window each time the shadows outside flashed with lightning. "Daddy, is the storm going to blow our house away?" she whispered, her voice so soft it nearly drowned in the roar of rain. Mark knelt beside her bed, brushing back her dark hair. His jaw was tight, but his voice steady, the voice of a man who refused to let fear in. "No, sweetheart," he said. "This house is stronger than any storm, and so are we." The walls shuddered as if to prove him wrong, but Mark didn't flinch. He tucked the blanket up to Sophie's chin, kissed her forehead, and began humming the lullaby her mother used to sing. Slowly, her breathing calmed, her eyelids heavy. Yet outside, the storm wasn't calming, it was building. The wind howled louder, a sound more like a warning than weather. And Mark knew, deep down, this night wasn't finished testing them. He just didn't know how soon his door would be knocked upon, or how dramatically his world was about to change. The storm was no longer just noise. It was violence pounding against the house, shaking the shutters, rattling the roof. Mark Turner stood in the hallway, listening to the furious drumbeat of rain, thinking the worst was finally passing. That was when it came. A knock, loud, sharp, urgent. Mark froze. For a moment he thought he imagined it, that the storm was tricking his ears. But then it came again, harder this time. A pounding that cut through the thunder itself. Someone was at his door. His pulse quickened. Who would be out in weather like this? What kind of person would risk their life walking through a storm that felt like the sky was splitting in two? Another knock, even louder, rattled the frame. Sophie stirred in her room, mumbling in her sleep, but did not wake. Mark grabbed his jacket from the hook, pulled it over his shoulders, and approached the door cautiously. The sound of the wind grew louder with each step, like an invisible giant pushing against the house. He wrapped his hand around the knob, hesitated for just 1 second, then flung it open. The door nearly ripped out of his grip as the storm shoved its way inside. Sheets of rain sprayed across the threshold. Lightning flashed, and in that blinding light he saw them. A woman, drenched from head to toe, hair plastered against her face, clutching the hand of a small boy who looked no older than Sophie. Both of them shivering, both of them soaked, both of them desperate. The boy's lips trembled as he clung tighter to his mother's side. The woman lifted her head, and for a moment Mark's breath caught. He knew that face. "Olivia Harris," he whispered, hardly believing it. It was her, the Olivia Harris, the CEO of the company where he worked, the woman he had only seen in pristine business suits, in glossy newsletters, in polished presentations where she seemed untouchable. And here she was, on his porch in the middle of the storm, stripped of all that power, shaking, pale, and human. Her voice cracked as she tried to speak. I am so sorry to show up like this. My car broke down on the road. The engine just died. We tried to call for help, but nobody answered. We have been walking in the rain for half an hour. Please. We don't know where else to go." The words hit him harder than the thunder. Mark's mind spun, trying to reconcile the image of the powerful executive with the trembling woman in front of him. The storm roared behind her, wind whipping through the trees like a warning that she could not survive another minute out there. Ethan's small voice broke through the chaos. "Mommy, I am cold." That was enough. Mark stepped aside instantly, his instincts louder than his doubts. "Get in here. Both of you. Quickly." Olivia hesitated only long enough to pull her son through the doorway. Mark slammed the door shut, locking out the storm with a final thud. Inside, the sudden quiet felt surreal, as though the outside world had ceased to exist. But the truth was still there, dripping across his floor. The CEO of his company was standing in his living room, water pooling around her shoes, her son pressed against her side, both trembling with exhaustion. Mark's voice softened though his heart still hammered. "You are safe now. Let me get you something warm." For the first time since he opened the door, Olivia looked directly at him. Her eyes glistened not just from the rain, but from something deeper. Relief, fear, gratitude. And in that instant, Mark understood. This storm was not just tearing apart the town outside. It was about to tear open a new chapter of his life inside. The moment Olivia and Ethan stepped across the threshold, the storm seemed to claw at the door as if furious that they had escaped its grip. Mark slammed the lock into place, his heart still hammering, then turned to face the soaked pair. Water pooled on the wooden floor beneath them. Their teeth chattered violently, and Ethan clung to his mother's sleeve. Trembling from the cold, Mark did not hesitate. He rushed down the hall and came back with 2 thick towels. "Here, dry off," he said firmly, placing one in Olivia's hands and draping the other around Ethan's shoulders. The boy's eyes were wide, still full of fear, but the soft fabric seemed to calm him. Olivia whispered a quiet "thank you," her voice weak, her lips pale from the cold. The heater hummed loudly in the corner of the room, but it was not enough. Mark hurried to the kitchen, filled the kettle, and lit the burner. The hiss of gas and the rush of flame filled the silence. He worked quickly, grabbing cocoa powder, sugar, and milk, knowing that warmth was not just comfort but survival tonight. While the kettle heated, he glanced back toward the living room. Olivia was kneeling beside Ethan, rubbing his arms through the towel. For the first time, Mark saw her not as the distant CEO whose signature could change a man's life, but as a mother desperately trying to keep her child safe. The realization stirred something inside him. The kettle whistled. He poured steaming liquid into 2 mugs and carried them back. "Drink this," he urged. Olivia accepted with trembling fingers, Ethan wrapping both hands around his cup. The steam fogged their faces, and little by little the shivers began to ease. Just then, a small voice came from the hallway. "Daddy." Sophie had woken, her dark hair messy, her stuffed bear dangling from one hand. She stared at the strangers in the living room. For a moment the silence was thick, only broken by the storm rattling the roof. Mark motioned for her to come closer. "Sophie, this is Olivia and her son Ethan. Their car broke down in the storm. They will stay with us until it is safe." Sophie's wide eyes flicked to Ethan. The 2 children studied one another, unsure, the way kids always do when confronted with the unexpected. Then Sophie stepped forward. Without saying a word, she pulled the blanket from her shoulders and draped it around Ethan. The boy blinked in surprise, then gave her the faintest smile. That simple gesture shifted the air in the room. The fear seemed to retreat, warmth returned. Not only from the heater or the cocoa, but from something invisible and powerful. The storm still raged outside, but inside the walls of Mark's small home, another kind of storm had calmed. Olivia's eyes softened as she watched the children. She took a sip of cocoa, exhaled, and her rigid posture melted away. "I cannot thank you enough," she said quietly. "We were so close to giving up out there." Mark shook his head. No one should be left to face a night like this alone. The rain slammed against the windows again, but it no longer mattered. In that moment, they were no longer a frightened woman and her son, no longer a lonely man and his daughter. They were 4 souls sharing shelter, strangers bound by circumstance, already beginning to feel like something closer than chance. The storm roared outside, slamming against the windows. But inside Mark's small living room, the atmosphere began to shift. Olivia disappeared briefly into the bathroom, and when she emerged, she was no longer the commanding figure from corporate offices. She wore one of Mark's old sweaters, far too big for her, and a pair of sweatpants that dragged at her ankles. Her hair, once plastered to her face with rain, now curled softly as it dried. She looked smaller, human, and fragile. Yet there was something about her eyes, something softer, that spoke of relief. Mark noticed it instantly. She carried herself differently now, not with the steel posture of a CEO, but with the gratitude of a mother who had finally found safety. She whispered, almost ashamed, "Thank you. I cannot remember the last time someone took care of me like this." He simply nodded. Tonight is not about titles. Tonight is about staying alive and keeping the children safe. The 2 children were curled on the couch, munching on crackers and sipping the last of their cocoa. Sophie leaned against her stuffed bear, while Ethan's eyelids grew heavier with every blink. The sound of their small laughter, mixing with the storm's roar, created a strange harmony that filled the room with warmth. Olivia watched them closely, her face softening. For a woman used to boardrooms and constant decisions, this simple scene seemed to unravel something inside her. She reached out, brushing Ethan's damp hair back as he slowly drifted toward sleep. Mark lit a small lamp beside the couch, dim enough not to wake the children, but bright enough to keep shadows at bay. He placed a plate of cookies on the table. "Eat something before you rest," he suggested. Olivia smiled faintly, breaking a cookie in half and handing the smaller piece to him. It was the first time that evening she looked less like a guest and more like someone sharing a home. The children finally surrendered to sleep, their breathing soft and steady. Ethan's head rested against Sophie's shoulder, and though they had only just met, they looked as if they had known each other for years. Olivia covered them gently with a blanket, her movements tender and protective. She lingered for a moment, her fingers brushing Ethan's cheek. Before stepping back with a deep breath, Mark stood quietly, watching her. The storm might have threatened to tear the roof from above, but here in this small room, there was calm. He spoke softly. "You and Ethan can take the guest room. It is not much, but it is warm and private." Olivia hesitated. She was not used to relying on others, yet the exhaustion in her bones left no room for pride. "You have already given us more than enough," she said. Mark shook his head. "You are safe here. That is all that matters." Together they carried Ethan into the guest room. Careful not to wake him, Sophie stayed asleep on the couch, clutching her bear. Olivia tucked her son under the blankets while Mark set a lamp on the nightstand. For a moment their eyes met above the child's peaceful face, and something unspoken passed between them. A recognition of shared burdens, of silent battles fought alone, now suddenly eased by the presence of another. When Olivia finally lay down, her body sagged with relief. Mark stood in the doorway for a second, watching her close her eyes. Outside, the storm raged on, merciless and wild. But inside, for the first time in years, both of them felt something they had almost forgotten: safety, and perhaps the beginning of something even more. The storm had finally broken. Morning light spilled weakly through the blinds, illuminating the quiet corners of Mark's small home. Branches lay scattered across the street outside. Puddles shimmered in the yard, but inside there was peace, for the first time in what felt like years. Olivia Harris opened her eyes without feeling the weight of the world pressing down on her. She lay still for a moment, cocooned in the guest bed, listening to the faint sounds of life drifting from the kitchen. The rich aroma of coffee wafted through the hallway. There was the soft clatter of dishes, the hum of a kettle, and the unmistakable sound of a child's laughter. It was so simple, yet it pierced her like something she had been missing all along. She rose slowly, running her fingers through her hair, still wearing the sweater Mark had given her the night before. Stepping into the hall, she followed the scent and sound until she reached the kitchen doorway. What she saw there made her heart clench. Mark stood at the counter, flipping toast from the pan with practiced ease. Sophie balanced on a stool beside him, her little hands placing apple slices onto a plate. Their movements were synchronized, quiet and natural, as if they had done this routine together countless mornings. Mark said something that made Sophie giggle, and the sound rang out like sunlight breaking through clouds. Olivia lingered in the doorway, unseen for a moment, her eyes locked on the scene. It was ordinary, yet extraordinary to her. This was not a corporate office or a sterile boardroom. This was a home. This was life. Mark finally noticed her standing there. "Morning," he greeted, his voice calm but warm. "Coffee is ready if you want some." Olivia managed a small smile, stepping forward. "I cannot remember the last time I slept that well." Mark poured her a cup, sliding it across the counter. "Storm's lullaby," he said lightly, though his eyes carried more meaning. Ethan padded into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. Sophie hopped down and handed him a piece of toast without hesitation. He accepted it with a sleepy grin. The two children sat together at the table, side by side, as though they had been siblings all along. Olivia joined them, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. The steam curled upward, blurring her view for a second, and in that haze, she saw something she never allowed herself to imagine: normalcy, belonging, a family. They ate together, sharing toast, fruit, and laughter. Mark asked Sophie about her favorite storybook, and she launched into a dramatic retelling that made Ethan laugh so hard he nearly spilled his milk. Olivia found herself laughing too, the sound strange in her own ears, as if it had been buried too long. She caught Mark watching her for a moment, not with the cautious respect of an employee to a boss, but with quiet recognition. He saw her not as the CEO perched on a pedestal, but as a woman who wanted to be part of something real. Breakfast ended slowly. With no rush, no phone buzzing, no looming deadlines, the children darted into the living room to play with blankets and toys. Leaving Olivia and Mark alone in the kitchen, Olivia traced the rim of her coffee mug, her voice softer than she intended. I had forgotten mornings could feel like this. Calm, safe. Mark met her gaze. Steady. Storms remind us how fragile we are. But mornings like this remind us what matters. For a long moment, the silence between them was not empty. It was full, and Olivia knew, deep inside, that this morning was more than just a pause after a storm. It was the beginning of a shift she could not ignore. By mid-morning, Olivia's phone buzzed with the long-awaited call from the towing company. She stepped outside briefly to hear the voice over the static-filled line. When she returned, her expression was both apologetic and weary. They cannot get to the car today, she explained. The roads are still blocked. It will be tomorrow at the earliest. Mark leaned against the counter, arms folded. Watching her carefully, he saw the hesitation in her eyes, the fear of overstaying, of intruding. Before she could say more, he spoke. Stay here. Do not worry about it. This house has room, and the kids already seem happy together. The relief in her face was impossible to hide. She nodded softly, and the tension in her shoulders eased. By afternoon, the storm had faded into gray skies. The children had turned the living room into their own kingdom, dragging blankets and pillows across the floor to build an elaborate fortress. Sophie declared herself the queen. Ethan the brave knight. Their laughter echoed down the hall, louder than the fading wind outside. Olivia leaned against the doorway, watching them play. The sight drew a rare smile to her lips, one that made her look years younger. He has not laughed like this in a long time, she admitted. Mark joined her, his voice quiet. Neither has Sophie. Maybe storms have their uses after all. Later, in the kitchen, Olivia surprised him by rolling up her sleeves. Let me help with dinner, she said. You cook? Mark asked, amused. A spark of pride flickered in her eyes. I love to cook, but when you run a company, there is never time. Everything becomes schedules, deadlines, meetings. Cooking became a luxury I had to abandon. Mark handed her a cutting board and a knife. Soon the sound of chopping vegetables filled the air, blending with the gentle simmer of a pot on the stove. Olivia moved with practiced grace, her hands sure, her motions steady. Mark could not help but notice how alive she looked in that moment, more real than he had ever seen her in polished boardrooms. You look different here, he said without thinking. She glanced up, smiling faintly. Different is good, he nodded. Different is real. For a while, they worked in silence, side by side. Steam rose from the pot, carrying the scent of garlic and herbs through the house. It was simple food, but it smelled like home. As they stirred and chopped, conversation flowed more easily. They spoke of the nights they had spent alone, worrying about bills, about children, about the emptiness that lingered once the house went quiet. Olivia confessed that success had given her financial stability, but had stolen something more precious: time. Mark admitted that he often lay awake, wondering if he could give Sophie enough while carrying the weight alone. The words hung heavy between them, not as complaints, but as truths rarely spoken aloud. In those moments, they were not CEO and employee. They were two parents with tired hearts, finally finding someone who understood. When dinner was ready, the children abandoned their fortress and rushed to the table. They ate hungrily, their faces lit with joy. Olivia laughed at Ethan's messy grin, and Mark teased Sophie about the crumbs on her cheeks. The table, once quiet, now buzzed with warmth and noise. That evening, as candles flickered against the walls, Mark caught Olivia's gaze across the table. There was no pretense in her expression, no mask of authority, just a woman who was tired, grateful, and for the first time in a long time, not alone. The lights flickered once, twice, and then died completely. The storm had claimed the power lines. Darkness swallowed the room, broken only by the sound of rain pounding against the windows. For a moment, silence fell. Then Mark struck a match, the flame bursting to life. Small but defiant, he lit a row of candles, their golden glow pushing back the shadows. The children clapped at the sudden magic of it, their eyes wide with excitement. Sophie pulled Ethan toward the living room rug, where Mark placed an old board game. The storm outside seemed far away now. Instead of fear, the room filled with laughter as dice rolled and pieces clattered across the board. Olivia sat cross-legged beside her son, her face softening with every round of play. She laughed when Sophie made a dramatic move. She teased Mark when he fumbled a turn. Her shoulders loosened. Her eyes sparkled in the flickering light. The woman who had entered this house drenched and trembling was now laughing freely, her voice mingling with the children's giggles. Mark watched her quietly between turns, noticing how naturally she fit into this small world of warmth. She no longer looked like the distant executive who gave orders from glass towers. She looked like someone who belonged here. When the game ended, the children slumped against each other, yawning, their energy finally spent. Olivia leaned back, letting the candlelight dance across her features. Her gaze swept over the modest furniture, the drawings taped to the refrigerator, the worn but cared-for walls. She turned to Mark, her voice low but full of emotion. "You have built something beautiful here," she said softly. "This is more than a house. This is a home." Mark held her eyes, the flicker of the candlelight catching in both their gazes. And in that quiet moment, with the storm raging outside, something powerful and unspoken settled between them. The morning sky had cleared, washed pale and soft after the storm's violence. The roads that had been rivers of mud were now scraped open by the work of crews. A tow truck rumbled slowly down the street, its engine echoing through the quiet neighborhood. Inside the small house, Olivia gathered her things. The sweater that Mark had lent her was folded carefully, though part of her wanted to keep it. Ethan clutched his small backpack, glancing around as if he did not want to leave the fortress of blankets he and Sophie had built. Mark helped carry their bags to his old pickup. Every step felt heavier than it should. The house that had been so full of warmth now seemed to echo with the threat of emptiness. Sophie trailed behind, her little face clouded, unwilling to say goodbye to the friend she had only just found. The tow truck driver waved, ready to lead the way to Olivia's stranded car. It was time. Mark opened the passenger door, and Olivia guided Ethan up onto the seat. She turned then, facing Mark in the crisp morning air. "Thank you," she said, but her voice cracked, trembling with something deeper than gratitude. Her eyes searched his, as if words were failing to express the truth of what she felt. Mark swallowed hard, nodding once. "You do not need to thank me. Anyone would have done the same." Olivia shook her head, her hand tightening on the edge of the door. "No, not anyone. You welcomed us when you did not have to. You gave us shelter, safety, kindness. That is not something I will forget." For a moment they stood there, the space between them charged with unspoken meaning. The storm had passed, yet something had begun within those walls that no truck could carry away. Sophie climbed onto the step, pressing Ethan's hand before he left. The two children exchanged a look, reluctant, as if promising silently that this was not the end of their story. Olivia finally climbed into the seat. Mark closed the door gently, the thud sounding final. The truck pulled forward, carrying them away. He stood in the driveway long after the sound faded, the silence louder than the storm had ever been. He did not realize it then, but this goodbye was not an ending. It was the beginning of something far greater. A week later, Mark's phone rang at his desk. The voice from Human Resources was clipped and formal, asking him to report to the executive office immediately. His stomach tightened. He had done nothing wrong, but the weight of the summons pressed heavy. He walked through the glass corridors, every step echoing louder than it should. When he pushed open the door, he froze. Olivia was there, standing by the window, sunlight streaming behind her. No assistants, no board members, just her waiting for him. "Mark," she said, turning with a smile that was warmer than any he had seen at work. "Please, sit." Confused, he obeyed. She slid an envelope across the polished desk. Inside was a letter of promotion, with a salary increase large enough to change his life. Mark stared at the paper. His breath caught in his chest. "I do not understand," he whispered. Olivia leaned forward, her eyes steady. "I have been thinking about that night. You did not treat me like a title. You treated me like a person in need. You did not just open your home. Mark, you opened your heart. That is something rare, and it deserves to be honored." For a moment he could only sit in silence, the storm of gratitude and disbelief crashing inside him. He had offered kindness without expectation, and now life was offering something back, more profound than any paycheck. The storm was gone, but its memory lingered in the bond it had created. Days turned into weeks, and the two families found themselves inseparable. They shared picnics under open skies, movie nights that echoed with laughter, and long walks through the park where the children ran free. Slowly, the walls between colleagues crumbled, leaving something deeper, something real. One evening, as the sun bled gold across the horizon, Sophie and Ethan chased each other in the yard. On the porch, Olivia and Mark sat side by side, exchanging a smile that promised this was only the beginning. After storms come new beginnings. Mark and Olivia's journey proves love and hope can appear when least expected. If you felt the power of this story, like, share, and subscribe to join us for more unforgettable tales.